Imagine waking up 10 years from now, opening your phone, and realizing that the tiny slice of Bitcoin you almost didn't bother buying is suddenly worth more than your car, your savings account, and maybe even your house. Sounds exciting, right? Now imagine the opposite scenario where that same zero point 0.1 Bitcoin barely moved the needle, and you're wondering why you didn't just spend the money on pizza, which historically speaking is also a very valid way to use Bitcoin. So the real question is not just can zero point 0.1 Bitcoin make you rich, but rather, what could zero point 0.1 Bitcoin realistically become, and what kind of life would that actually buy you? First, let's ground ourselves in reality for a second. One full Bitcoin is already expensive, which is why so many people now talk about fractions instead of whole coins. You don't need to own one entire Bitcoin to participate. Owning zero point 0.1 Bitcoin simply means you own 10% of one coin, like owning one slice of a very expensive digital pizza that nobody can cut into more slices later. And that last part matters because there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin. No extra batch, no Bitcoin 2.0 Deluxe Edition. Scarcity is built in. Now here's where things get interesting. If adoption keeps growing, more people, companies, and even governments could end up competing for a fixed supply. Imagine musical chairs, but instead of chairs, there are coins. And instead of kids running around a classroom, it's hedge funds sprinting in expensive suits. When the music stops, not everyone gets a seat, so even small amounts could become valuable simply because there isn't enough to go around. But before we start planning our future private islands, we need to talk numbers, because feelings don't pay rent. Let's run through a few possible price scenarios. These are not predictions, they're what-if situations, like financial fan fiction, but with math. If Bitcoin were to reach $100,000 per coin, then zero point 0.1 Bitcoin would be worth about $10,000. Nice, but not exactly early retirement material, unless your retirement plan is living in a tent with really good Wi-Fi. Now imagine Bitcoin reaches $500,000 per coin. Suddenly, that same zero point 0.1 Bitcoin becomes $50,000. That's serious money. It could pay off debt, fund a business idea, or at least buy a car that doesn't make mysterious noises every time you turn left. Push the scenario further to $1 million per Bitcoin, and now 0.1 Bitcoin equals $100,000. That's life-changing for many people, though still not never work again money in most Western countries, unless your hobbies are extremely cheap, like staring at walls. Of course, some enthusiasts believe Bitcoin could go even higher over decades, especially if it becomes a global reserve asset or digital gold equivalent. In extreme scenarios, 0.1 Bitcoin could potentially represent a very large amount of purchasing power. But here's the catch that nobody on social media likes to emphasize. Price alone doesn't tell the full story. Inflation matters. $100,000 in the future will not buy what it buys today. If everything else becomes more expensive too, your moon gains might feel more like a very enthusiastic hill. Another thing people often forget is that rich is a relative term. Someone living in a high-cost city might need several million to feel financially secure, while someone in a lower-cost region could live comfortably on a fraction of that. So whether 0.1 Bitcoin is enough depends heavily on where you live, how you spend, and whether your idea of luxury involves yachts or just not checking prices at the grocery store. Now let's talk about time, because Bitcoin is not a microwave investment. It's more like a slow cooker. Nothing happens for a while, you wonder if it's broken, and then suddenly everything is boiling and you're not sure how you got there. Historically, Bitcoin moves in cycles with long, quiet periods followed by explosive runs. People who panic during the boring parts often miss the exciting parts, which is a bit like leaving a movie 5 minutes before the plot twist because nothing happened for 20 minutes. Risk is also part of the equation. Bitcoin is famous for volatility, which is a polite financial word for emotional roller coaster. Prices can drop sharply, sometimes for extended periods, before recovering. If you own zero point 0.1 Bitcoin, you have to be mentally prepared for moments where it feels like you made the worst decision in human history, followed later by moments where you briefly consider yourself a financial genius. Neither feeling lasts forever, by the way. There's also the adoption question. Bitcoin's long-term value depends on whether it continues to gain users, infrastructure, and legitimacy. Over the years, we've seen growing institutional interest, payment integrations, and regulatory frameworks developing around the world. Each step toward mainstream acceptance strengthens the case that Bitcoin could remain relevant for decades rather than fading like a forgotten tech trend. Nobody wants their investment to become the financial equivalent of a dusty old MP3 player. Another angle to consider is opportunity cost. The money you put into 0.1 Bitcoin could have been invested elsewhere. Stocks, real estate, businesses, even education can produce returns too. So the real comparison isn't just will Bitcoin go up, but will it outperform other options over the same time period? Investing is less about finding something that rises and more about finding something that rises more than the alternatives. Now here's a perspective shift that many experienced investors share. Instead of asking whether 0.1 Bitcoin will make you rich on its own, consider it as part of a broader strategy. It could act as a high upside asset in a diversified portfolio. Think of it like hot sauce. A little can dramatically change the flavor of the whole meal, but drinking a bottle straight is probably not advisable unless you enjoy chaos. Let's also address the too late fear, because that stops many people from starting at all. Yes, early adopters who bought Bitcoin for a few dollars saw incredible returns, but adoption curves for transformative technologies can last decades. The internet didn't peak in 1998 just because people discovered email. New layers of use kept emerging. Similarly, Bitcoin's future path depends on how it integrates into global finance, not just how early you personally arrived. One more practical point is accumulation. Owning 0.1 Bitcoin today doesn't lock you into that amount forever. Many people gradually build their holdings over time through strategies like dollar cost averaging, buying small amounts regularly regardless of price. This reduces the pressure of trying to perfectly time the market, which is good because almost nobody can do that consistently, not even the people on television who speak very confidently while pointing at charts. So can 0.1 Bitcoin make you rich enough to live comfortably? The honest answer is that it could contribute significantly, but it's unlikely to be a guaranteed golden ticket by itself unless Bitcoin reaches extremely high valuations or your lifestyle costs are relatively modest. It's more realistic to view it as a powerful asset with asymmetric potential, meaning the upside could be large compared to the initial investment, but the outcome is uncertain. If Bitcoin does achieve widespread global adoption, even small fractions could represent meaningful wealth. If adoption stalls or competition from other technologies reduces its role, the gains could be far smaller. Investing always involves uncertainty, which is why anyone promising guaranteed riches is either overly optimistic or trying to sell you something that probably comes with a free webinar. Ultimately, the question isn't just whether 0.1 Bitcoin is enough, but whether you are building a financial life that doesn't depend on a single outcome. Savings, skills, income, and diversified investments all work together. Bitcoin can be a powerful component, but expecting one asset to solve everything is like expecting one gym session to make you permanently fit. It would be nice, but biology has other plans. So if you own Bitcoin, you're not late, you're not early, you're simply participating. You hold a piece of a scarce digital asset that could appreciate significantly over time. Whether it becomes a life-changing fortune or a helpful financial boost depends on factors far beyond today's price chart. And honestly, That uncertainty is part of what makes the whole story so fascinating.